MaryLouMcDonald.
Minister, the budget that your government announces in 2 weeks' time must be about ending the rip-off, getting costs under control and supporting workers and families. Households struggle just to make ends meet, hammered by soaring prices at every turn. And yesterday, Kantar reported that grocery prices have shot up again in the last 12 weeks. Of course, people didn't need a research report to tell them that. They feel it every time they go to the supermarket. Under Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, living costs have become unaffordable, and people cannot believe their ears when they hear you dig in and insist that you won't take action to tackle the crisis. Last week, we were in here raising the fact that 3 energy companies had announced big electricity price hikes to kick in from early next month. Well, since then, Minister, a 4th company, SSE Electricity, has announced that they too will increase their electricity prices from October. So, hundreds of thousands of households will be forced to pay out even more for their electricity. 300,000 households, remember, are already unable to afford their electricity bills, and these are working people who just can't keep up. And yet, your government waltzes in to withdraw energy credits when they will be so desperately needed. But I suppose we shouldn't be shocked by yet another out-of-touch decision. Speaking at the weekend, Public Expenditure Minister, your colleague Jack Chambers, stated that government is conscious not to increase costs for people. But this is the same government that has chosen to hike up the prices of petrol and diesel, of home heating oil, of rent, of student fees. He also stressed that he will, as he put it, have a return to normal budgeting. But Minister, there's nothing normal at all about the way households are being fleeced. Nothing normal about the severity of these electricity price hikes. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael allowed this energy rip-off to happen. At no point have you stood up to the big companies. They get away with gouging customers because, frankly, your government is a soft touch when it comes to them. So not alone have you sat on your hands and done nothing, you've pushed back against our proposals to reform the energy market to get costs under control, and the consequence of your inaction is that households are left to wonder how much more they'll have to pay out just to keep the lights on. Minister, you can't wash your hands of your failure to tackle these runaway energy prices and then waltz in and cut the supports on which so many households depend. Níl daoine in ann ghlacha leis na harda seo phrais an lectricus, ní cordon rialtas an succar fuinneamh a bhfuil líon mór teaghlaigh ag bra a harangt séir. We've had minister after minister tell people that they understand the pressure that households are under. The Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, the Minister for Finance all say that they get it. And I know they say the talk is cheap, but government talk and hot air is proving very, very expensive for workers and families. Lip service won't put manners on these companies, won't reduce one energy bill, won't ease any of the pressure people are under. What we need is action. So, Minister, I want to invite you today to tell households that you will protect them from these energy price hikes. I want you to tell them that there will be provision for energy credits in the forthcoming budget.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
I want to thank Deputy MacDonald for the question. And Deputy, at the outset, can I say you don't have a monopoly on empathy or compassion for householders when it comes to addressing the difficult circumstances that members of the public find them in as a result of cost of living pressures. It's important to point out, however, that this government has done a huge amount in respect of those cost of living pressures. And if you look at what's been done in the previous budget in 2025, you can see that you're invoking those measures today as a means of assisting people. You weren't so supportive of those measures when we announced them 12 months ago and indeed 24 months ago. If you look at Budget 2025, you can see that there is a whole wide range of measures that were introduced which had the effect of protecting members of the public from the excessive costs that were arising as a result of inflation. You can see that we introduced an increased payment in respect of the rent tax credit from €1,000 to €2,000. There was the extension of the 9% reduced VAT rate for gas and electricity. And that was a very real measure that was introduced, Deputy, for the purpose of ensuring that we did reduce the cost of energy for householders. We also saw the extension of the mortgage interest relief until the end of 2025 and the €300 lump sum payment in respect of the fuel allowance. And that's not even getting to the double-month child benefit payment. You're correct in stating that there were two 125 electricity credits for households, and they were very effective for what was a time when there was very high energy prices and when inflation was out of control. We're fortunately in a position now where inflation has come down. But let's be clear about it, Deputy. This government will continue to introduce measures in respect of the forthcoming budget that will have hard-pressed families at the centre of them. And I know my colleagues Jack Chambers and Pascal Donoghue will have that at the forefront of their considerations when it comes to the measures contained within the budget. You'll note as well that in April we decided to extend the VAT reduction to 9% on gas and electricity, and since its introduction this measure will save households €70 for gas and €55 for electricity. This decision was further supported by Minister Darragh O'Brien's announcement in June of a 40% reduction in the renewable electricity PSO levy for 2025 and 2026. Also from September, there will be a significant increase in the number of people who qualify for the fuel allowance. And also, just in terms of other pressures that are under another cost, at the beginning of June, the Carers Support Grant increased to €2,000, its highest level ever. And that benefited some 138,000 carers. And last week, Deputy, the income level disregard increased for the carers allowance. So there's a whole range of measures that this government has introduced in the past, and I can assure you that when the government comes to announce the budget in 2 weeks from now, there will be measures in that that will have hard-pressed families at the centre of considerations. We also need to look at the fact that parents of school children have been given considerable support by this government. Over the summer months, the back-to-school clothing and footwear allowance will be paid out, and for the first time this has been extended to foster carers. And that's let alone before we get talking about the fact that parents who have school-going children at present, they don't have to pay for school books because of measures that were introduced by Minister Foley and brought forward by Minister McEntee. So you mightn't like the fact that a huge amount of measures have been taken by this government to relieve pressure on hard-pressed families, but the fact of the matter is any fair assessment of what's been done shows that that has been done by this government. And I have to say your concern about what's going to happen in the forthcoming budget is concern that I think is misplaced, because I can assure you that the government will be placing hard-pressed families at the centre of its deliberations. I look forward, however, as well to seeing your own budget proposals, to see what you're putting forward, and I'd be interested to see if you will adopt again the measures that we introduced before that you denigrated when we introduced
Deputy
them.
MacDonald.
Well, Minister, you don't have a monopoly of being out of touch or a monopoly on hollow self-congratulation, because your buddies in Fine Gael are right there with you. I mean, inflation has tamed, that's right, but costs and prices are still sky high. And I've just instance for you, 4 separate electricity companies that are telling us that prices are going up as early as next month. Prices are up and there's a record number of households that can't meet their bills. That's the reality of the situation. And I will make no apology to you, Minister, or your friends across Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael or the Lowry crew for arguing the case for households, for workers and families that are struggling in the here and now. And I am simply stating to you to support our proposal, which you will see in our pre-budget submission, for the payment this winter of €450 of energy credits that households desperately need. If, as you say, you share an empathy, a compassion, and you understand how badly families are struggling, you should have no difficulty, Minister, confirming today that the budget will contain that precise measure.
Minister.
Deputy, I'm the Minister for Justice. I'm not the Minister for Finance or the Minister for Public Expenditure. I don't announce the budget terms 2 weeks before the budget is announced. We'll have an opportunity. You'll all have an opportunity to hear the budget 2 weeks from now when it's announced by the Ministers for Finance and Public Expenditure. But in terms of hard-pressed families, you haven't responded to the issues that I've raised about the measures that we've taken in the past. That they can't just be ignored. There's a record of the past. You can't ignore the past, Deputy Doherty. You can't ignore what we've done in the past and now try and claim credit for what we did previously. In circumstances when you didn't support them at the time, we were announcing them in budget day. Let's look at the VAT rate on energy costs. That's something, as I say, that we've retained the 9% rate on it. That's something that will be dealt with on budget day, and we look to see what that will be announced. What I'm not going to do, however, is pre-announce the budget here today. What I will do, and what I can assure you that deputies and ministers Donoghue and Chambers will do, is they'll read carefully your budget submission. If there are good proposals in it, they'll give them consideration. If there aren't, and it's just populist outrage, they'll ignore them like they should do.
Minister. Deputy Ivana Bacik of the Labour Party.
Minister, the families of 1 in 5 children in Ireland, that's more than 225,000 children, now live below the breadline. Minister, ours is a relatively wealthy country, and yet we see more than 5,000 children homeless. That's 5,000 in emergency accommodation doing their homework on the floors of hotel rooms or family hubs, and far too many living in overcrowded homes, multiple generations all under one roof. Minister, you may not be the Finance Minister yet, but your party has the housing portfolio and you are TD for Dublin Bay South. And across our community, the communities we represent, Minister, we see entire generations, entire branches of family trees, multiple generations crammed into one tiny space because of the housing crisis, because of the housing disaster. And at the very hardest edge of the crisis, those children in housing insecurity who are facing the awful prospect of eviction. The thought of this resonates with all of us. All of us, Minister. Families are in despair. Individuals are in despair. I'm talking with my Labour colleagues this morning who are hearing daily, as I am, from people who are becoming increasingly desperate with the lack of housing. And increasingly, our representatives, and your government reps too, I'm sure, are finding that they can offer them nothing because there's no safety net now for families facing eviction or anyone else facing eviction. And we learned today that the Minister for Housing has written to councils on the tenant in situ scheme. That was to be the safety net that your government had introduced to keep families in their homes where landlords were choosing to sell up. In March of this year, new restrictions from your government all but eliminated the safety net for far too many people. No new acquisitions across Dublin City or in Cork. Under criticism from your government's own councillors, Minister. Minister Brown has now issued a letter to local authorities, and we hear it says they can now proceed with more acquisitions up to a value of 30% of their original 2025 budget. But Minister, those commitments are for 2026. So you're borrowing into next year, it seems, kicking the can down the road and doing nothing for families whose applications have already been rejected this year for tenant in situ, because central government, it seems, has turned off the tap. And the numbers involved are rising. I've said our representatives are dealing every day with families facing eviction, families whose applications have been turned down. We're hearing despair, we're hearing people who see no future for themselves, people who are even, Minister, horrifically expressing suicidal thoughts because of the lack of hope with this housing disaster. And where are they to go? And what are we to offer them? What are you to offer them, Minister? There's so much you could do and your government could do. You've said that putting hard-pressed families will be your priority. You'll be putting hard-pressed families at the centre of this budget. Well, let's hear from you. Will you use this budget to restore the tenant in situ scheme to full functionality? Will you ensure that local authorities must prioritise housing children, as per our Labour bill that you had supported previously? And third, will you go further? Will you act to end the eviction of children? Because we could do that. You could do that, Minister. You could stop any more than the 5,000 children already in homelessness.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Yeah, thanks very much, Deputy Bacik, for your question. And obviously, child poverty is an enormous issue in this country, and it's an enormous issue that the government wishes to respond to. And you've heard the Taoiseach and indeed the Taoiseach to say that child poverty will be at the centre of the budget that is forthcoming, and that will be announced in 2 weeks from now. I can understand, Deputy, why you wish me to give information in respect of the budget that will be forthcoming in 2 weeks. I can't do that, and we're just going to have to wait to realise what's in the content of the budget when it is announced. But you can be sure, and it's the case that the government will be adamant about this, that tackling child poverty is a central aspect of this government. You talk about the impact that the housing crisis is having on children, and we are fully aware of that. Again, you're not the only one who is aware of the impact this has on children and on families. And although you display great empathy, I haven't heard any solutions from you in terms of practically how we can improve and alleviate the issue in respect of housing. So we have repeatedly stated that the most effective way in terms of getting people off the homeless list and off the housing list is to ensure that there's a greater supply of housing in our society and available. That has been repeatedly stated. You can criticise government for the amount of it, but we have stated that that is our commitment, and when you look at the figures that have been produced, you can see definite progress in respect of it. Between July 2020 and the end of Q1 2025, 48,939 social homes have been added to the social housing stock. That's a very significant number of social houses that have been added, Deputy, and it's not something that can be ignored. And also, if you look at that, then more than 13,100 homes were brought back into use under the Voids programme. Again, you'll know from being a TD for the City of Dublin that there are too many voids in Dublin which had the effect of being unused. We need to get them back in operation so that families can get back in respect of them. 2023 and 2024 saw delivery of newly built social housing reach levels not seen since the 1970s, with almost 16,000 social homes built over the 2 years. Like, we are aware, Deputy, as well, I'm sure you're aware too, our population is increasing very significantly. The population increased up to April 2024, and that 12 months, by 98,000. So it's putting huge pressures on the system, and we have to recognise that although government is making considerable efforts and getting a lot of social housing developed, that because of the population rise, there's going to be issues in respect of it. Also, when the housing assistance payment and rental accommodation schemes are added, 2,712 housing supports were delivered in Q1 2025. And Deputy, I'm aware also you mentioned the tenant in situ scheme, and that is a scheme that has worked. It has worked throughout the country. I note the issues there may be sometimes in respect of Dublin, but it is an important measure. It is an important measure in the prevention of homelessness since its introduction in 2023, and government is providing €325 million in 2025 for local authorities to buy second-hand properties.
Deputy Bacik.
Well, Minister, of course supply, increasing supply is a huge part of resolving the housing crisis, and we'll be putting forward constructive costed proposals in our alternative budget next week, just as we did in our manifesto last year, on how you increase the supply. The reality is, Minister, you haven't met your own targets on house building, and you know that. And on tenants in situ, of course it was a safety net that was introduced. Of course we all agree it should have been introduced. However, your government has gutted it, you've filleted it, so it's simply ineffective, and all of us are hearing this, including your own backbenchers are hearing it. Minister, our Labour motion tomorrow is putting forward practical, constructive ways in which your government can address the issue specifically of child homelessness. I know you've said you're not going to announce budget proposals now, but you could take two of the steps that we're calling on you to do in our motion tomorrow, and I hope you'll support it. And those are not involving budget proposals, and they could be done now. One, will you pass our Labour bill to protect families with children from homelessness? And two, will you restore the ban on no-fault evictions where children are involved? That simple measure would be a stopgap for sure, but it would offer struggling, despairing families some immediate safety net, some immediate respite.
Well, as I said to Deputy MacDonald, Deputy Bacik, when you produce your budget proposals, we'll take them into account and government will give them consideration. I've no doubt that that will arise in respect of that. In terms of what you said about the tenant in situ scheme, you should be aware that on the 4th of March 2025, the government decided on a total of €325 million for second-hand social housing acquisitions in 2025. So that's not a feeble effort, Deputy Bacik. That's a hugely significant amount of money that government has made available. And the funding allocations approach was a change from the approach in 2023 and 2024, where local authorities were issued with a guide number of acquisitions. The whole purpose of it is to allow local authorities to negotiate the acquisition costs with vendors and landlords and achieve the best value for money. So each local authority has now received its individual allocation, and you're pleased to hear that Dublin City Council is the highest at €95 million for 2025. So local authorities are being provided with significant amounts of money, and government wants them to see them buying properties.
Deputy Holly Cairns of the Social Democrats.
Minister, for 2 years now, the country has been watching a genocide unfold in Gaza in a complete state of disbelief. Wondering, how can this be allowed to happen? How can so-called world leaders stand idly by as a genocide is live streamed before our eyes? I'm not dismissing the fact that Ireland recognised the state of Palestine. It was welcome. It's welcome that more countries are doing the same now. But ultimately, there is barely anything left to recognise. Gaza has been reduced to mass graves and rubble. So it is 2 years, too little, too late. Not to mention the fact that some of those countries now recognising Palestine are still arming Israel. And what exactly has it achieved? Israel has not hesitated in its continuing pursuit of wiping out a population. Why is there such a reluctance to take further action? It is so hard for people to comprehend. It's hard to even believe. We see footage of multiple babies packed into one incubator. We see parents cradling the bodies of their dead children. We see journalist after journalist annihilated. And then we see the government still dithering over the Occupied Territories Bill. Israel is starving Gaza, then killing people as they line up for food and water. They are bombing hospitals and refugee camps. They even bombed the team that were trying to negotiate a peace deal. This has been going on for 2 years. What more could it possibly take for this government to act with conviction, with consequence, with the might of the strength of feeling in this country? Where is the decisive action we saw when Russia invaded Ukraine? Where are the sanctions? Where is the proportionate, rational response to a genocide? The Western world has watched it all and done nothing. Actually, less than nothing. Minister, proposal to suspend parts of the EU-Israel trade agreement is finally on the cards. Making the announcement last week, Vice President of the European Commission, Kaja Kallas, said she wanted to be very clear. The aim is not to punish Israel. The aim is to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Let me say that again. The aim is not to punish Israel. After it razed Gaza to the ground, murdered more than 20,000 children and bombed every single hospital, this despicable and cowardly language is outrageous and it is shameful. Minister, as an EU citizen, I'm ashamed of that response. My question is, are you ashamed too?
Thank you, Deputy Minister, to respond.
Thank you very much, Deputy, for your question. And what's happening in Gaza is horrific slaughter. And it's not just me and you and every member of this House who's saying that. We saw recently that the United Nations Independent Commission has ruled that what's happening in Gaza and what Israel is doing is committing genocide. I suppose many people in Ireland feel a sense of helplessness in terms of what can be done in response to it. But my view is that this government has done more than any other government in the world in response to the plight of the Palestinian people in Gaza. If you look around the world, what stands out to you is the fact that there are so many countries, many Arab countries, who've done so little for the cause of the Palestinians in Gaza. In contrast, Ireland has led the way, not just in Europe, but internationally. Like you, I was very pleased to hear over the weekend that so many other countries have decided to recognise a Palestinian state. Portugal, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Malta, Liechtenstein, New Zealand, UK, Canada and Australia. Very many of them small European countries. They followed the example that Ireland set when we, along with Spain and Norway, decided that we would recognise a Palestinian state. And there was huge pressure on the Irish government not to do that. But we did it because it was the right thing. And you can see what's happening is that the example set by Ireland is being followed by other EU countries. When you look in terms of the proposals to respond to trade between Israel and the EU, when Ireland advocated that we should introduce an occupied territories bill, when that was advocated at the European Union level, there was very little support. We now know that other countries are considering it and introducing it. In fact, that bill has been very effective from Ireland's point of view in terms of trying to get the EU-Israel trade agreement on the agenda. You're aware more than, like we all are in this House, of the historical alliances that exist between Israel and certain countries in the European Union. We can do very little about that, but the pressure that Ireland has put on is having an impact. And we can see now that the EU-Israel trade agreement is coming under consideration. I'm hopeful, and I know the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach are hopeful, that when it comes to suspension of that trade agreement, that measures will be taken. Of course, they should have been done very many years ago. But Ireland is a small country. We're an influential country. But all we can do is use our reputation and our influence to try to get people to follow our example. And you can see to date that that has been done. And when you look at the cases that were taken in the International Court, again, Ireland intervened and respected them. So, Deputy, you can criticise the government, but when you look at this objectively internationally, you'll see that the Irish government is one of the most vociferous supporters of Palestinian people and standing up to the genocide that's going on in Gaza.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Cairns.
Minister, like I said, we all welcome the countries are now recognising the state of Palestine, and we welcomed it when Ireland did it too. The point that I'm trying to make, and the point that you're ignoring, is that that is literally the bare minimum, and there is barely anything left to recognise. So the bar is quite literally on the floor when we're talking about Ireland being held up as an example, and that is the point that I'm trying to make. Because unless the international community acts, there is literally nothing left to recognise. The Israeli government haven't hid their genocidal intent. The Taoiseach acknowledged that yesterday. He said some Israeli ministers had genocidal intent from day one, and now it is day 720. So when is the response to Israel going to match the scale of its crimes? When is real action going to be taken? In this country, we could be doing more. Enacting the Occupied Territories Bill has been a solemn commitment of this government, an election commitment that hasn't been lived up to yet.
Thank you,
So,
Deputy.
Minister, can you give me a date? When will you enact the Occupied Territories Bill?
Thank you. Minister.
Well, it's in priority legislation and it will be enacted and certainly introduced into your office this term, we believe. Deputy, can I just make one important point that sometimes isn't emphasised enough? The entity responsible for the genocide in Gaza is the Israeli government. And we all need to point that out and state it repeatedly. And rather than criticising the Irish government for narrow domestic political purposes, I think you should acknowledge the very real efforts that have been made by the Irish government to support Palestine. And you mentioned what else has been done. We've taken, as I say, responses in respect to the cases that are before the International Court. We've provided 90 million. We have tried to influence our international partners. As I said to you, Ireland cannot just dictate to the rest of Europe, or indeed the rest of the world, as to what its foreign policy should do. Unfortunately, we can influence it, we can't dictate it. And you can see what's happening over those horrific 700 days, that people, other countries, are gradually coming around to recognise that the Irish government's position is the correct position.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you. I now call on Deputy Charles Ward.
Minister, I'm not going to mince my words. The Defective concrete scandal is a national emergency that your government willfully mismanaged for over a decade. The government has worked hard to fool the public, to portray that we are being looked after. The truth is that now we're in the second failed scheme. My staff see suicidal ideation every week in our office. The uncertainty and the feeling of abandonment in this crisis has caused us 40% of homeowners that are living with severe depression. This is the reality, and yet still no timeline when IS 465 will be reviewed. Legislation for retrospective payments has still not been published since the grant amount was increased almost 1 year ago, despite Minister Brown telling us it would be prioritised in June. And let's talk about unethical engineering decisions that are still happening. Chartered engineers under the original scheme made recommendations for full demolition, yet chartered engineers from the Housing Agency continue to overturn them. People are being told their homes are safe when they are not. Complaints have been made to Engineers Ireland, but the government remains silent at the cost of people's health and safety. Minister, the truth is that the government has the power to fix this crisis today, but they don't need to wait till the review of IAS 465. The defective concrete has been trotted out as a poor excuse for inaction for far too long. The government wrote the legislation in full knowledge the obstacles would present to accessing the scheme and continue to hide behind this to this day. Under Irish law, the government can declare a national emergency and issue ministerial guidance and fast-track legislation to address this crisis. The legal framework is there, but the will to act is missing. Minister O'Callaghan, I need real answers, and I would be grateful if you'd respectfully give them to me. And those that are affected, not running down the clock that usually happens, people looking over and wasting time. We need answers, and we need them now. People are suffering, literally dying. This government runs down the clock and delays things. Minister, my first question is, will you and the government use the powers under the Public Service Management Act 1997 to immediately issue ministerial guidelines to the Housing Agency to stop issuing partial fixes and ensure full remediation of affected homes? Second question. The government used its ministerial authority to direct the Housing Agency to reinstate the original engineers' recommendations for full demolition and stop madness of partial fixes that will fail in the future, and follow the science. And finally, families who were early movers, who were reassured they would not be disadvantaged, will be given their legislation to ensure that they're given the 10% retrospective payment that they were meant to get and not be punished.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thanks very much, Deputy Ward, and I'll try to be as succinct in my answers as your questions were. Your first question was whether or not the government would use the Public Service Management Act. The answer to the question is no. The government won't use it because the Defective Concrete Block Grant Scheme operates under its own primary legislation. And in November 2024, following the receipt of preliminary results from scientific research in Donegal, the Department announced changes to the way the scheme works for certain homeowners. And all homeowners who have been given a non-demolition option have been offered a choice of continuing with the work on their dwelling under the option determined, or the option of a full technical review of their application by the Housing Agency. And this review will be informed by the current research once the full review of the national standard is complete. Your second question, Deputy Ward, was will the government use its ministerial authority to direct the Housing Agency to reinstate original engineering recommendations? In response to that, Deputy, I'd say that an appeals panel has been established to assess appeals made under the remediation of dwellings damaged by the use of defective concrete blocks. The panel offers those affected by decisions made by the Housing Agency and local authorities an opportunity to have their cases assessed by an independent group of industry experts. And the points of appeal that are available to an applicant include the validation stage by the local authority, the damage threshold determination made by the Housing Agency, the remediation option, and the grant amount approved, and where a local authority refused to make a grant payment pursuant to grant approval. And it should be noted, Deputy, that the appeals panel is statutorily independent in the performance of its functions. It's independent of the Minister, the Department, and indeed the Housing Agency. Your final question, Deputy Ward, was whether or not families who are early movers in the scheme were told that they would not be disadvantaged, and you want to know, will the government pass the legislation to ensure that all homeowners receive the uplift in rates and cap retrospectively? As I say, the decision from government in 2021 was that applicants under the previous grant scheme would not be disadvantaged from being early movers and would benefit from the increased grant amounts that were available under the current scheme upon its commencement in 2023. This was allowed for in the 2022 Act under transitional provisions, and these early movers have benefited from the increased scheme cap and grant rates provided for. So, Deputy, I welcome your direct and surgically focused questions, and I just wanted to give you those answers as best I could in respect of it. And I'm conscious as well, in terms of legislation that you refer to, there is legislation that I'm instructed will be coming forward, will be introduced as priority in the forthcoming term, and that's something that government, as I say, will give priority to. Thank you, Deputy Ward.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Ward.
We have unethical engineering going on in this scheme. There's no way you can't deny it. We have a number of people that were downgraded were given full demolition. An engineer came out, done their job, examined it, and then it was passed over to the Housing Authority. Looked at the engineer's work and then downgraded a fellow colleague's or a fellow engineer's work. This is unethical. It's unethical engineering. What we've got going on here has been going on. We suspect that this is widespread and it will continue. How can we have engineers determining if something is a downgrade when we are reviewing IS 465 and they're still coming forward and downgrading people today as we speak, even though we do not have IS 465? Can you please put something in place to suspend this so that these people have a chance to get their review done properly, not when we're in the middle of a review of IS 465.
Minister to respond.
Well, Deputy Ward, I will talk to the Minister for Housing, obviously has responsibility for this issue, and I will raise with him the issues you've identified. You mentioned in your reply that you say that there is unethical engineering ongoing in Donegal. If that is the case, there are mechanisms in place to report engineers who are acting unethically, and I would assume and would urge people who believe they're the victims of unethical engineering that they use the appropriate mechanism to report engineers involved in that type of activity. We have an Institute of Engineers in Ireland. It regulates engineering performance, and anyone engaged in unethical behaviour should be brought to the attention of that body. In terms of the other issues you raised in respect of defective concrete blocks, I am conscious of the impact from speaking to Deputy McConalogue and Deputy Gallagher of the impact it is having in Donegal. But I have to say to you, Deputy, the government hasn't been found wanting when it comes to providing money to resolve this scheme. A huge amount of money has been made available in the past and will be in the future.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes Leaders' questions. Now we move to the note on order of business.